Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of True Drew Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about the Ringmaster's Secret. But before we get into that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of you that are listening. I was just looking at my analytics from, the past couple months, and it's been so cool. We have so many different listeners, and just to read off some of these countries, there's United States, Canada, Australia, Norway, United Kingdom, Sweden. So that is so cool to me that there are that many people around the world that love Nancy Drew as much as I do. So thank you all so much for listening and for all the reviews you leave on the podcast on Apple or Spotify. I appreciate that more than you can know. Now, on to the Ringmaster's Secret. This is the 31st book in the Nancy Drew series and was published for the first time in 1953. And I was able to find two separate book covers for this book. And if you ever want to see these covers, I post them on my Instagram, True Drew Podcast, on Wednesdays before the episode airs. So the first edition of this cover, which is the 1953 version, we have Nancy and Lolita. And Lolita is one of the circus performers, and she's got this dark black hair, and she's wearing this pink tutu sort of ensemble. She's an acrobat. And Nancy is wearing this blue dress with an interesting, I guess it's a brooch at her throat. It looks like a sea urchin. It looks really dangerous. But Nancy has blonde hair, and she kind of looks a little bit like Doris Day or a little bit like Grace Kelly. But in the background, you can see just the very smallest glimpse of a wild cat, like a lion or a tiger, in one of these cages. And you can see the big top of the circus tent in the background, and you can see the ringmaster. Oh, and I just noticed another interesting detail. I zoomed in on the cover, and so Nancy's carrying this little wicker purse, which looks super cute, but it's actually got an N on the front of it for Nancy. So I knew Nancy was a monogram girl. So the first edition of this cover, super colorful, very pretty to look at. I really like it. But the second edition, which is on the revised books, I don't know. It seems very just sloppy and kind of thrown together. I don't know. Some of the revised covers are not my favorite. But we have Nancy on the back of a galloping horse. She's standing, and she looks a bit like a ballerina. She's wearing this pink costume. She's got bright red hair, and then we have the ringmaster who looks very ominous. He's got the makings of like a villain mustache, the ones that you can twirl, and he looks very sinister. So the funny cover spoof that I came up with for the Ringmaster's Secret is "Not my circus, not my monkeys." How could I pass up that opportunity? Sometimes these things just write themselves. As far as a magnifying glass rating, I gave the original cover 5 magnifying glasses. I love the original cover, but the revised I gave a 2 because, it's just not my favorite. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the characters that are in the Ringmaster's Secret, and we have Signor Roberto, who is Nancy's horseback riding teacher, and there's a man named Hitch, who is a stableman at this horse riding academy, and he's actually an ex-circus member. We get to that later. But there's also Teddy Brown, who's a 6-year-old neighbor of Nancy's, and of course she takes him to the circus. And Reinhold Kroon, who is the ringmaster, and his wife, Mrs. Kroon. Lolita, who she plays Cinderella in the circus, and she's actually the Kroon's foster daughter. There is Lola Flanders, who is Lolita's real mother that's gone missing. Both of her parents went missing. And Pietro, who's a clown. Dan Webster, who is a horse trainer. Ran Coco, who is a horse rider. And another clown named Leo Sanders. So it's quite literally a circus full of people to keep up with. But we're going to jump right into the synopsis for the Ringmaster's Secret. Aunt Eloise sends Nancy a mysterious charm bracelet with horses on it, saying legend has it a queen gave it to a circus performer. Nancy goes to her circus horse riding stunt class, because that's a thing she does, and someone throws a rock at her horse's head while she's doing a stunt. She suspects it's a stableman, Hitch. Nancy later takes her younger neighbor, Teddy, to the Sims circus, and a clown notices Nancy's charm bracelet. She meets him after the show, and he says Lolita, an acrobat in the show, has a charm on a necklace that reminds him of the ones on Nancy's bracelet. Nancy speaks to Lolita about finding her parents, then goes back to the stands, only to be almost strangled with a whip. Nancy later joins the circus as a trick rider, but sabotage continues to happen. She and Ned catch Hitch, Roberto's stableman and ex-circus worker, in trying to hurt members of the circus, and the croons steal Nancy's charm bracelet. Nancy and George are kidnapped and escape a train. Nancy gets kicked out of the circus by Croon and makes a trip to London to find Lolita's mother, Lola Flanders. She finds her in a nursing home where she was left by the Croons and prescribed an amnesiatic cocktail of drugs so they could take her daughter Lolita and her inheritance. Nancy goes to get Lolita, and Croon tries to throw her in the lion cage, but she is saved by Ned. The police take Croon, Lola and Lolita are reunited, and Lolita and Pietro marry. So the newspaper headline synopsis that I came up with that sums this all up is "Big schemes beneath the big top. Long thought dead aerialist found and reunited with daughter, all thanks to Nancy Drew." So I'm just going to preface this by saying if you liked the movie or the book Water for Elephants, then you would probably love this book. There's a lot of just circus atmosphere, and it's a fun read. So now we'll go ahead and jump into some of the direct quotes and things that I wrote down about this book that stuck out to me. So Nancy is performing circus stunts on a horse called Belgian Star, and I said, is there anything that she can't do? I mean, the girl knows how to judge the weight of cars. She can, guess if someone's wearing lifts in their shoes and break codes, and now she's performing circus stunts. Nancy gave me a little bit of a complex as a kid. Reading them now as an adult, she makes mistakes, and I can see that, but as a kid, I was like, dang, what can Nancy not do? She's kind of like Barbie in that respect. So the next note that I said, oops, scratch that. Someone threw a rock at the horse, and it threw Nancy off. That had to have hurt. I've gone horseback riding, normal horseback riding. I cannot imagine standing on top of a horse or flipping over one backwards. Props to Nancy. So Nancy takes Teddy, her 6-year-old neighbor, to the circus, which, by the way, they wake up at 5:30 a.m. to go to this circus. That's dedication. I'm one of those people, I like to sleep in. If I'm traveling, I'm going to get up because it's, the world is my oyster. It's something new. But if I'm just going about my daily stuff, I like to sleep in. I am not waking up at 5:30 to go to a circus. But of course, Nancy takes him to the circus, and in 5 minutes he's disappeared and almost gotten crushed by a falling pole. And then when Nancy is walking around with him through the circus, he says loudly, "Is he one of the freaks?" So Teddy is talking about the ringmaster, Mr. Croon, and I said, everyone knows proper circus etiquette entails you don't say that. And I was like, come to think of it, most social settings, calling people freaks is frowned upon. So the next note that I wrote down is Pietro, a clown in the circus, says Lolita's parents were acrobats called the Flying Flanders, but they died and they don't say how. So Croon, the ringmaster, is Lolita's adopted father, and we find out later that Lolita's father actually did die and her mother survived, but at first I was like, well, what happened? Were they, in an acrobat accident, or was it a boat accident? We need to know. Because honestly, a boat accident is just as likely in the Nancy Drew books, but we do find out later that it was an acrobat accident. So this next note that I took down, this was scary. So Nancy's up in the stands sitting there with Ned, and I'm presuming they're just eating popcorn and enjoying the circus. But Nancy gets choked from behind with a souvenir whip that they sell. And I'm just I'm sure she's flailing around. Does Ned not even notice this? Because it's not till the whip is taken from around her throat and she's gasping for air that Ned's like, oh, are you okay, Nancy? Ned, be a better boyfriend. Can you not tell that your girlfriend is being strangled not a foot away from you? But anyway, when Nancy gets home later, she finds there's a note in her dress telling her to stay away from the circus. So not only was she almost strangled to death, but she was threatened via a note. Also, we can now add almost strangled to death to the list of growing ways that Nancy almost dies, along with almost froze to death, thrown in a cistern, and trapped inside a statue. So my next note just says Lolita and Pietro are engaged, so I thought this was sweet. This was very, like, I don't know, this romance made sense. Sometimes the Nancy Drew books have random romances thrown in, which I'm like, I'm not really rooting for them, which may sound bad, but I thought their romance was very sweet. So the next thing that I wrote down is a disaster happens and someone throws a whip at Rosa, one of the bareback riders, and she gets hurt, and of course, I'm sure you know where this is going, Nancy takes her place. So she just conveniently knows how to bareback ride and stand up on these horses and do stunts. So this book, I feel like we haven't talked about it in a couple books because there haven't been too many like overtly offensive things since maybe like the Leaning Chimney, I guess. But they do say, they use the term midget a lot in this book, which I was like, okay, that didn't really age well. Now, the next thing that I took note of is that Croon, the ringmaster, hates Nancy with a passion. So she hides and makes Bess pretend to be the stunt rider. So Bess she can ride just normal horseback. So she does that enough to pass the test, but then she says she needs to change her clothes. So Nancy switches places with her and wears a blonde wig and does the stunts. I can just picture Bess later like, Nancy, I am going to kill you. You always get me in these weird situations, and it's got to stop. So Hitch, the stableman that works at Senor Roberto's riding school where Nancy takes her lessons, steals Nancy's costume, and Nancy's able to find it, but during her performance, Hitch tries to throw a baseball at the performers. So Ned and Nancy go to the riding school to confront him, and they tie him up, but they also find that Roberto has been upstairs and tied and whipped. So Hitch didn't do that to Roberto, but he is guilty of all this sabotage of the circus performers. Like, he just has an axe to grind, I guess because he wanted to be a stunt rider and wasn't good enough, but it's just like, dude, like, that dream has passed. That ship has sailed. Like, get over it. So the Croons steal Nancy's charm bracelet, and come to find out later in the book, the charm bracelet was given to Lolita's mother, and the Croons they're basically trying to keep the inheritance, and they have taken Lola Flanders, Lolita's mother, and basically shoved her into a nursing home. It's really messed up, but basically, Nancy goes to London to follow this lead and find Lola Flanders, and this part was hilarious. So Pietro, the clown, who is wanting to marry Lolita, happens to be on the same flight as Nancy, and Ned tells Nancy not to stay in London and marry Pietro, and he's being dead serious, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, Nancy just met this guy, but Ned is so jealous, like, in a stupid way. It's like, Ned, come on, she's not going to marry a circus clown and go live in London. Like, calm down. Oh, Ned Nickerson, what are we going to do with you? Now, this next part is absolutely insane, but Nancy gets her overnight bag stolen in London, and she wrestles it back from the man, and a bottle of acid in her bag that the guy just stuck in there, I guess, opens, and the fumes hurt her eyes, and she almost goes blind. Like, Nancy happens to get to a doctor in just the right amount of time, but I was like, girl, you almost lost your eyesight. Like, you need all 5 senses to solve these mysteries. Oddly enough, I had something bad happen to me in London. I didn't get acid thrown in my face or, almost blind me, but I actually had my phone stolen. It's been like 2 years ago now, but I got it back a day later with the help of the police, so that was wild. But this made me think of that, like the fact that Nancy had this bad thing happen to her in London. I was like, I can totally relate, but I also kind of had my Nancy Drew mystery moment. I kind of got to work with the Scotland Yard. But that is a story for another time. So, Nancy finds Mrs. Flanders at a nursing home, but what's really, really messed up about this is that she has amnesia, but it's induced by drugs. So basically the Croons left her there, took her daughter Lolita and her inheritance, and then they told the people, hey, just give her this cocktail of drugs and just do it for the foreseeable future. Like, what? Who does that? An evil ringmaster, that's who. So, you probably knew this was coming. There's going to be some grand finale that can only happen in a circus setting, but Croon tries to throw Nancy in the lion's cage, and Ned saves her. So Ned sort of redeemed himself from his stupidity of earlier, being jealous of Nancy and Pietro, who are only friends, but I'm glad he was there to save her from the lion's cage. Oh yeah, and so this was a note that I wrote on another page, but Nancy and George get kidnapped and put on a train, and at first, Nancy doesn't know that George is with her because they're both blindfolded and gagged. But once Nancy is able to roll towards her, she feels George's face and is able to tell that it's her. So this happened a little bit earlier in the book, but I was like, so does George have like just a huge nose? Or like, I don't know. Like, I think if I was blindfolded, I wouldn't be able to know my friend's face. Like, maybe my husband's face. So for the next segment of the podcast, I like to call this What's Cooking with Hannah Gruen. And Hannah actually did cook one thing for this episode. She made a souffle, and she says, nothing should interrupt a souffle. Wise words. Because she gets really aggravated with Nancy. She's like taking a phone call and answering the doorbell, and Hannah is like, no, you need to sit down and enjoy the souffle that I made. Now, for the add that to your resume section of the episode, I said that Nancy could put that she's a trick horse rider because, I mean, if you can't put that you're a circus stunt woman on your resume, what can you do? Now, onto the things that I liked and the things that I didn't like about the Ringmaster's Secret. I put down that I really liked the circus setting. I thought it was really neat. I thought it was cool that Nancy got to be involved in it in so many different ways. And the only thing that I didn't like was the croons. They were horrible to Lolita. They would like lock her in her trailer and they would yell at her. And also they like took her from her parents, which is really messed up, and drugged her mom. So yeah, I didn't like the croons. But as far as giving this a magnifying glass rating, I gave the Ringmaster's Secret a 4 magnifying glass rating. I thought it was a really good book. It made sense. There were some twists thrown in there, and I just like an interesting setting, like on a boat or a circus. I'm all about it. So yeah, that concludes this week's episode on the Ringmaster's Secret. I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and next week we're going to be talking about the Scarlet Slipper Mystery. If you like books about smuggled jewels in paintings, and you like made-up countries that remind you of Genovia from The Princess Diaries, then you will not want to miss next week's episode. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. If you'd like to stay up to date on the latest information and new episodes, our Instagram is True Drew Podcast. Or for general inquiries, you can email us at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com.